Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the late start. We had a couple of minor technical difficulties, but looks like we're good to go now. So really just to introduce myself, my name is Andy Luttner. I am a project manager with the Cabinet for Economic Development, focusing on attraction projects. And one of my sectors is the metal sector. I started with the Cabinet just about 2 years ago. It'll be exactly 2 years in October. And I'm somewhat new to Kentucky. My wife and I arrived here in Louisville, to be exact, in 2017 from New York City. She was recruited by Yum Brands, and prior to joining the Cabinet, I worked for a private bank managing a portfolio of commercial real estate assets in a variety of subsectors across the country. But today, what I do want to focus on is the metals industry in Kentucky, what makes this place a great place for metals companies to locate and do business, and what we at the state and local level can do in order to attract companies from that sector. So just to kind of start off with a brief overview of the sector, the two different kinds of manufacturing. So what kind of manufacturing is there within the manufacturing of metals? So the first one is going to be primary metals manufacturing, and that's going to involve the separation of metals from ores in a furnace to produce slabs or ingots of metal. And that's going to involve things like steel, aluminum, non-ferrous metal production and processing. And this also would include foundry operations, which produce metal shapes by pouring molten metal in the cast. And then the second kind is going to be the fabrication of metals, so fabricating metal products. And that type of manufacturing is going to involve bending, cutting, coating, heat treating, even stamping. So just kind of think about maybe boilers or hardware manufacturing, any kind of structural or architectural metals. So, it's kind of a broad range in that regard. As we move along, just kind of the global makeup of the industry itself. So if we start with the steel industry, China is by far the world's largest producer of steel. As the slide indicates, they produce more steel than the next 6 largest steel-making countries in the world. And China does produce half of the world's steel as well. Part of the reason for the dominance is kind of twofold. The first one is China is an extremely expansive landscape, as you can imagine. So they have a abundant amount of raw materials they have access to. Another reason that, I don't know if a lot of people really think about is, unlike competitors, whether it be Canada or the European Union or the United States, is the environmental regulations in China are quite lax, if you will. So, obviously, if we think about in the United States, we have governing bodies that kind of dictate and regulate what goes in the ground, what goes in the air, what goes in the water. In China, they do have regulations, but not near as stringent as other countries and areas. So that does give them, somewhat of a competitive advantage. As we move on to aluminum, the top producers in the world from an aluminum perspective are going to be China, India, Russia, and Canada. The United States comes at 10th with just under a million metric tons of aluminum produced per year. Kind of a common theme you guys are going to hear throughout the presentation is how much energy this sector uses. So really, whether it be the beginning process or the ending of the manufacturing of metals, it is a huge consumer of electricity, and the industry itself consumes or really accounts for 12% of all industrial energy consumption across the globe. And another thing I want to focus on is in the last decade and a half, we've seen a rampant increase in demand within the sector. One of the main reasons has been emerging economies throughout the globe, so China, Brazil, India. And then with those emerging economies, they've also have a robust middle class and a growing middle class that has increased demand on specific metal sectors such as automotive and construction industries. So that's really in the last decade and a half, if you will, why we've seen this significant growth, within the sector. As we move along to the United States, so the metal industry within the country is very top heavy. So you have 50 of the largest companies making up over 60% of the revenue within the industry. And then from an aluminum perspective, all aluminum activities within the United States represent or make up roughly about 1% of GDP within the country. So another thing to keep in mind is efficiency in the manufacturing process is really paramount to maintain your competitive advantage. This industry is very capital intensive. Economies of scale are really important. Margins tend to be relatively small. So just a couple things to keep in mind as far as the United States is concerned in the sector. Now, when we kind of go into trends, there are several trends right now that we see throughout the industry. The first one, and this really isn't a recent trend, it's been a trend probably for the last 20 years, give or take, is going to be the increase in mini mills. And the reason we're seeing an increase in mini mills, for one, is they're less capital intensive. So what a mini mill does is they produce steel products from recycled scrap metal. And unlike your integrated steel mill, which makes steel from iron ore in a blast furnace, what a mini mill does is it melts refined scrap steel using an electric arc furnace. Now, the next trend is we kind of just going to look into the makeup of vehicles within the industry. So right now, steel makes up around 50 to 55%, give or take, of a car or a truck, any kind of automobile. Aluminum accounts for about 10%. Now, there's a variety of studies out there. The expected use of aluminum in cars should grow to about 40% within the next decade. And really the main reason for that is the increase in fuel efficiency or at least the projected increase is because of increased fuel efficiency standard throughout the country and then the globe. Aluminum has become more durable than years past. It's obviously lighter. Because it is lighter, that of course requires less gas, less energy to power a vehicle. And then just to kind of give you an overview of automobiles and aluminum and kind of that relationship. So aluminum's been used in automobiles for quite a while. I really didn't know this, but in 1901, Carl Benz of Mercedes-Benz, he was the first one. He developed the first engine with aluminum parts. And then following World War II, aluminum became really more cost effective, was mass produced, and it saw its popularity grow. And then in 1961, it was kind of the turning point. Buick produced the first aluminum block engine, and then they licensed it to Land Rover. And like I said, this was sort of the turning point of when aluminum was more frequently used in automobiles. And then kind of fast forward to today. So you take certain vehicles, and there's more than this, but this is just an example. So Ford F-150, an Audi A8, for example, and then all Land Rover XK models, all of those models, all of those vehicles I just mentioned have all aluminum bodies. So when we talk about all aluminum body and then we kind of focus on the fuel efficiency aspect of it. So just to give you an example, the Ford F-150, when it went all aluminum, it shaved 700 pounds off its weight. So again, fuel efficiency, a lighter vehicle, it's going to require obviously less fuel to operate. As we kind of focus on challenges that the industry is facing right now, obviously COVID's presented a variety of challenges for all industries. This sector is no different. I guess you could say kind of the silver lining from our perspectives could be some onshoring that is taking place or hopefully will take place in the future because of COVID. But one of the, aside from COVID, putting that aside, one of the main challenges right now within this industry is the heavy volatility with the trade war due to tariffs and specifically under Section 232. So to give you guys some perspective, so 2019, there was $26.4 billion worth of metal imports entering the country that were subject to tariffs. Of that $26.4 billion, $4.4 billion was levied in tariffs. So of course, that's an additional cost burden on those imports, and it certainly would impact the bottom line of the companies importing those. The flip side to that is the countries that kind of bore the brunt of those tariffs, basically China, India, Turkey, Russia, and EU, they put retaliatory tariffs on our exports. So we had $7.2 billion worth of U.S. metal exports that were then taxed as a retaliatory measure entering those countries I just mentioned. Now, the flip side of this, and I guess we could kind of focus on how it benefits us as economic developers is, whether it's a domestic company that maybe doesn't really have many manufacturing operations domestically, or maybe if it's just a foreign company that has no facilities here in the United States. Because of the tariffs, like I said, specifically 232, we've seen a lot of companies, whether it's anecdotally speaking, or even if you can just read in the news, that are kind of looking to either come into Kentucky or the United States in order to circumvent those 232. So there is a silver lining, amongst the volatility within that industry due to tariffs. There's a silver lining for us as economic developers. The other challenge the industry sees, and this is important because I've mentioned how energy intensive, if you will, this sector can be is, really any volatility within the energy markets can also present risks to companies and industries, like I said, or that specific industry. We look at kind of the overview of Kentucky, and it relates to the metals industry. So we have a great ecosystem here in Kentucky, really, a plush one, I guess, if you will, very fertile. The auto industry is the top buyer of metals in Kentucky, not a big surprise there. And then 1 out of 29 jobs are derived from the metals industry in Kentucky. And then aluminum-related facilities employ about 20,000 Kentuckians each year. And then the primary and fabricated manufacturing of metals account for about $5.2 billion to our economy here. Aerospace industry is also very well represented in the sector. And as most of you probably know, that industry is the largest export product in Kentucky. Now, I'm going to kind of let you guys digest this slide. It's a little detailed, but just take a look at it before I kind of explain what's going on here. So I want to give everyone an idea of the metal manufacturing process start to finish. In this case, use aluminum as an example. So conceptually anyway, much of the process is the same, whether it's, making iron, steel, or stainless steel. But since Kentucky has a nationally outsized role in the aluminum industry and various companies within the Commonwealth represent key steps of this process, I'll be using a few Kentucky companies and examples that would likely partake kind of in this process. So the aluminum making process starts with bauxite. Bauxite is an ore that's found in tropical and subtropical regions across the globe, and bauxite is heavily mined in China, of course, and Australia is the other country, and those two countries are the world's largest producer of bauxite. So next is the bare process, which uses chemicals and heat to extract alumina. Now, alumina is also referred to as aluminum oxide. That process extracts alumina from crushed bauxite. And really, alumina just basically looks like sugar, and this is important because this is where Kentucky comes in. So smelting is the first step in manufacturing aluminum from alumina. And this is a primary process. What it does is it shoots electricity through alumina powder, melting it in massive quantities. And smelting is a highly energy-intensive process. And again, every process throughout this step is going to be highly energy-intensive. And there are only 5 operational smelters in the entire country. 2 of them are located here in Kentucky. One's located in Hawesville. The other is located in Robards, both operated and owned by Century Aluminum. So when we talk about the overall kind of ecosystem within the Commonwealth, it really starts with those 2 smelters. Additionally, Century and Hawesville, they've demonstrated the capability to produce at least 100,000 metric tons of high quality aluminum, molten aluminum a year. And a lot of their aluminum can be found in defense industry products. So that particular aluminum is aerospace grade aluminum. Now, Century's 2 smelters are a huge advantage for Kentucky. And as I mentioned, the smelting process is the first step and produces high purity aluminum in molten form or in ingots. So molten aluminum is typically handled at about 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit, and ingots, which are intended for remelting, generally weigh between 700 to 2,000 pounds. And from a terminology perspective, a smaller size ingot is referred to as a pig, and a larger one we refer to as a sow. Now, another phase of this process is the melting of post-consumer scrap, which is then melted and cast into ingots. Novelis and Berea, for example, that's a company that melts post-consumer scrap, as is Owl's Head Alloys, which is located in Bowling Green. So the next step is molten aluminum or ingots, or really, so you'll have molten aluminum and ingots are then going to be transported to a rolling mill for further production. And once they get to that rolling mill, at this point, the high purity aluminum will be combined with melted ingots and other alloying metals to meet customer specifications. Now, ultimately, the alloy is rolled into various forms, including flat rolled coils. In this example, we're going to take Logan aluminum and kind of think of that as Logan in Russellville being a chemist. So they're going to mix these components to produce a desired chemical outcome by way of melting, alloying, casting, and then rolling. And the final product, like I said, can kind of be in a variety of forms. So you have sheet, plate, coils, other formats as well. And then there's two things that can happen. So then those can either be shipped directly to a customer, or then they can be shipped to a metal processor to slit, level, cut, or treat to a customer specifications. And Novelis and Guthrie is an example of a company that's able to surface treat aluminum. to specification. Now, I know as it relates to this slide, I've been talking about the aluminum process, but as a lot of you probably know, Kentucky also has a significant steel, iron, and stainless steel industry. And what I learned from a project earlier this year that I found really interesting was if you take chrome and nickel and add those metals to iron, you would then produce stainless steel. So, kind of nonetheless, I guess the point is, as you can see, Kentucky is really well represented in every aspect of this process. So you have alumina powder from bauxite that's mined internationally. It's ultimately going to be smelted at Century, and then will end up in trucks, cars, aircraft, defense components, and many other products manufactured throughout our ecosystem here in Kentucky. This next slide just kind of goes into, shows metal buyers by industry throughout the state. So you look east to west, very well represented. This kind of, in my opinion, this kind of does a good job of representing our ecosystem. So as we know, automotive industry is the largest purchaser of metals, and it's really no surprise you have those 4 OEMs and the clusters kind of around them. So I kind of look at the OEMs as the anchor for the ecosystem, and then everything else just kind of follows. But there's plenty of other industries, as the slide indicates, that also are heavy purchasers of metals. This is just a list of companies within the Commonwealth. Obviously, there's thousands that operate in this sector. This is just some of the larger ones. And the great thing about these large players is the supply chains they're going to bring with them. So just to use Nucor, which is a great company, as an example, we've already placed several suppliers, and I have personally as well, of Nucor in Gallatin County. And we've also had many inquiries where, been doing a lot of work on companies wishing to locate in close proximity to the Nucor Brandenburg site. And it's just not suppliers, it's customers as well. And the same can be said about Fritz Winter or North American Stainless or Logan Aluminum. These companies attract suppliers and customers, and they want to be close to them. And so, what I would say is when it comes to your community and attracting a company within this sector, kind of think of where you're located in relation to some of these larger players, and really how you can position yourself to take advantage of that. Now, another very relevant topic when we're discussing industry and attracting industry is workforce. So Kentucky's workforce is set up really well for the metals industry, and many of the top occupational groups within the industry have a higher concentration in Kentucky than the U.S. as a whole. And what I want to focus on in this particular slide is the location quotient. So location quotient is essentially a way of quantifying how concentrated a particular industry, occupation, or demographic group is in a region compared to the nation. And it's a measure of relative concentration. So for instance, if we look at assemblers and fabricators, Kentucky's almost twice as concentrated as the rest of the nation with a 1.94 location quotient, and we're 1.5 times as concentrated when it comes to metal and plastic workers. So compared to the nation as a whole, there's plenty of talent here to accommodate companies that wish to operate within this sector. Now, the next slide is really important because it kind of talks about where this talent comes from. I'm sure it's a slide a lot of you may be familiar with as well. So we look at the university system. So, we have 18 private universities, 8 public universities. I'm sure a lot of people on this call, obviously are alums from several of those universities. But, keep in mind, this doesn't include universities across our borders. I mean, Kentucky borders 7 states. There's really no reason, in addition to our universities, we can't pull talent from other areas and from other schools across our borders. And then when we focus on the community and technical school system, it's really kind of the envy of the nation. We have 16 community and technical main colleges, and then we have 70 campuses. And a lot of those campuses are located within industrial parks, or if not, within them, certainly within close proximity. Roughly 1,500 engineering and technology degrees are awarded annually in Kentucky. And once again, you look at the map, not a lot of blank spots east to west, and really there's plenty of dots across that map for communities to harvest talent in order to accommodate companies wishing to locate within their communities. So I've spoken about electric use and how the industry itself kind of uses an inordinate amount of electricity. And when we look at this slide, Kentucky stacks up very favorably compared to the rest of the country when it comes to industrial rates, and we should always be competitive in these projects because of that. And just to put it in perspective, the last couple projects I've worked in the sector have all had demands greater than 5 megawatts. And the 5 megawatts is actually on the low end on a couple of them. And then we've had a recent project that unfortunately has been put on hold because of COVID. I'm hoping it'll be kind of back in the forefront here shortly, but that particular company needs in excess of 30 megawatts. So we shouldn't discount the advantage Kentucky has when it comes to electric rates. Especially when we take into account, these companies are going to be using a ton of energy, are going to be spending hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars per year on electricity. So certainly something to our advantage we need to keep in mind. Another map I'm sure a lot of you have seen, and it's no surprise or no secret, I guess, that our logistical infrastructure, it's always been a strong selling point for Kentucky. But what I really want to focus on are the 12 river ports we have here across the state. And as I've explained, raw materials frequently come from overseas, and this industry it's a very much global industry. Many companies utilize waterways in order to move materials internationally, and our river ports are located all across the state. Most of the state's bordered by the Ohio River, and kind of just to show you how utilized our waterways are. Let's take Lock 52 for instance. Lock 52 is located outside Paducah along the Ohio. And it is the nation's busiest lock. Approximately 100 million tons of freight move through that particular lock each year. And then when it comes to deep water ports, and the two most frequently utilized deep water ports when it comes to Kentucky companies importing and exporting, the first one's going to be the Port of Savannah. So that services most of Asia, a lot of Europe as well. And then the Port of New Orleans, which also services quite a bit of European countries and also some other countries throughout the world. This next slide is probably one of my favorite slides. So I'm sure a lot of you know Dee Dee Caldwell. She's a really talented site consultant, provides a lot of good insight, and she gave a presentation kind of right before the COVID thing hit. It was back in February at Co-op Palooza, which was hosted by East Kentucky Power, and she spoke about this particular topic, and our really talented graphics team did an awesome job of kind of bringing it to life. So in this particular slide, I want to focus on the capital intensive projects, because most of the metal industry projects we're going to see are likely going to be greater than $1 million invested per job created. So they're going to fall in that category, and especially if we're going to be dealing in primary metals manufacturing. And what I want to focus on is typical drivers. So we look at the typical drivers. You have energy costs. All right, we've already talked about our energy. Everyone knows Kentucky has great competitive industrial rates, but let's look at infrastructure and permitting. So all that means is really how fast can we get our plant built and operational. So when you're going to invest this much money, when a company's going to invest this much money in a community, in a site or a building, speed kills, and speed is ultimately what's going to close these deals. And so what can we do at the state and local level to expedite permitting and to ensure a site is ready to build on? So I mean, think about it. If a company can be operational here 2 to 3 months earlier than a competing state, well, that's quantifiable. That's going to give us an advantage. And what I want to focus on as well is on the permitting side, and I think we need to drive this point home more often than not, is what separates Kentucky from many other states on the environmental permitting side is the Kentucky Division of Air Quality issues what's referred to as a combined permit. And unlike other states that have delegated authority, Kentucky's air permits include both construction and operational authorization. And really having that combined permit, that's going to expedite the review and approval process by requiring only one application to be submitted. So, so what does that mean? So, when we're talking about other competing states, we'll use Tennessee as an example. Tennessee is not going to allow a company to apply for operational authority until the construction is complete, right? So in Kentucky, both are granted at the same time. And generally speaking, this is going to give us an advantage from a permitting timeline perspective, and should allow companies to have a more aggressive timeline to operation here in Kentucky. Now, this is obviously a really relevant project because it's in the sector. We won it recently. This was won back in February, but this is Crown Cork and Seal USA. So they're owned by Crown Holdings. They are the largest aluminum can manufacturer in the world when it comes to beverage and food aluminum cans. They have 241 facilities worldwide. Like I said, they're a publicly traded company. They chose a wonderful site in Bowling Green. They have already begun building. It's a 320,000 square foot facility. Anticipate operational by March of 21. And this was really a fast moving project. We got the lead here right around Christmas. The company made a final decision end of January, early February. And when they came to us, they explained, hey, we have excess demand. We need to meet this demand. And ultimately, that requires getting a facility up and running ASAP. And that was the main criteria. Whatever site, whatever state could confidently demonstrate that they could be operational there quicker than anyone else, that was going to be who they were going to choose. And ultimately, that's what happened. The site in Bowling Green was phenomenal. Due diligence was on file. It was graded, had the required utilities. I mean, there really wasn't a lot that had to be done from a prep perspective for these guys to start building. And then what also happened was the company was heavily engaged with our Department of Environmental Protection and the Air Quality Division, kind of figuring out how long it would take for those air permits to be approved. And like I've been saying, with the permitting process we have in Kentucky, DEP demonstrated that they could meet the company's timeline. I mean, it was a realistic timeline, but it was certainly aggressive. And ultimately, because of the ready site and because of the aggressive permitting timeline, the company was very satisfied with moving forward with that site in Bowling Green. And people like to talk about incentives. They were a part of this deal, but that's not what drove this deal. It was that speed to operation. So I guess kind of when it comes to these particular projects that are sort of heavy capital investment, really if and in this sector too, if you don't have a site that's ready to build, you don't have due diligence on file, you don't have required utilities, it's just gonna be tough to win these particular types of projects. And again, I just want to focus on that permitting side from the state perspective, and like I said, that environmental permitting side. So we do have an advantage due to the combined permitting that the Division of Air Quality offers, and this project really illustrates when you have a site that's ready to go and has everything it needs with a permitting timeline that's realistic, but at the same time aggressive. And then just kind of to sum up everything on the final slide is, why Kentucky? So let's remember the location quotient. Our workforce here is readily available to accommodate companies within this industry. The ecosystem. We have a great flourishing metals ecosystem here. We have raw materials, we have buyers, we have producers, everything you would want within our borders. Low in industrial energy rates. You have these companies that use exorbitant amounts of electricity, spending millions of dollars a year. We have some of the lowest electricity rates in the country. We're going to be competitive one way or the other because of that. And then finally, the Kentucky's combined permitting process through the Division of Air Quality, and that does allow us to be again realistic but aggressive at the same time when it comes to meeting a company's timeline. So I really appreciate everyone's time today. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions you may have. No questions? All right. Well, if anyone has questions in the future, feel free to email me, or you can email the general mailbox if you don't have my email address, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the presentation or the industry itself as a whole. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. All right. We done? Am I off?
You're done.
How long was it?